Now, I want to cut to the chase in something that is very real. And Amy, I'm going to turn to you for this next one, is that many people who support and believe in Palestinian self-determination, in dignity, in rights, feel that false accusations and weaponizing accusations of anti-Semitism are often used to detract from the broader critique that they're making about the very real reality on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, and in the entire region. Amy, what do you say to folks who make this point, and how do you think about that very real dynamic that people are feeling?
Look, this is at the core of what we're talking about here, right? And that's why it's so important to do this work, to have conversations like this one across lines of disagreement, across different communities, as challenging as it may be, to understand where the line is. It's critical that people have a right to peacefully protest against policies that they disagree with, to speak out for Palestinian humanity and dignity and self-determination. And frankly, the same way that they would on any other issue. It's inherent to our democracy. And as I mentioned earlier, the majority of people showing up on campus or at other protests are doing so because they want to speak out for Palestinian dignity and human rights, not because they intend to be anti-Semitic. And so when we paint everyone showing up at these protests, speaking out against the war in Gaza with a broad brush, it makes it that much harder to effectively call out real anti-Semitism. And instead, it just seeks to divide us. At the same time, as we've talked about here, we've seen the line crossed in too many cases in ways that cause direct harm to Jews, and that ultimately threatens all of us. And so for me, the guiding principle for all of this work is to understand that no one's going anywhere. Jews, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans here in the United States, Israelis and Palestinians in the region, all of our futures are inextricably bound up with one another. And in fact, the only future in which I'm safe as a Jewish American woman is one in which my Arab American, Muslim, Black, immigrant, LGBTQ neighbors are safe, and vice versa. And so too is the only future in which Israel and the Israeli people are truly safe and finally secure, one in which Palestinian children and all people are finally safe and free. And so that requires us to do the hard work to understand how, in disagreeing over policies and protesting vehemently, we don't cross that line into harm, into eliminationist rhetoric, into anti-Semitism, and that we also not allow legitimate concerns and fears about anti-Semitism to be exploited to advance a broader extremist agenda that seeks to pit our communities against one another and undermine our fundamental democracy and our liberal values.
And I mean, that's so well said. And I think it also cuts to a different skill that we have, which is allyship. And that this isn't just like a term that is used in some saccharine way, but that it is a discipline and a practice. I am a woman of color. You are a Jewish woman. Our destinies are bound up. Our protection is bound up in one another. And it's so important that we stand up and defend each other. So, Amy, to you, what does allyship look like to you in this moment? And what are the stakes for our democracy in that allyship right now?
Look, there's so much that is complicated about this, but for me, this part shouldn't be complicated, right? Being an ally to the Jewish community right now doesn't mean that we're asking you to put an Israeli flag on your front door or support every action of the Israeli government. It means recognizing the very real Jewish pain and grief that our community is experiencing following the deadliest day for our people since the Holocaust. Pain and grief that we're still in because there are hostages that remain, because the war is ongoing. It means calling for the hostages to be released alongside the other policy changes that you want to see, recognizing that what happened on October 7th was heinous and unacceptable, even as you also oppose Israel's actions in Gaza or the Netanyahu government, or believe that this war needs to end. And so too does the Jewish community need to lean into allyship right now, especially at a moment when we're understandably feeling isolation and pain. Some have claimed that this, very real isolation and pain that many of us are legitimately feeling over the last 8 months is proof of failure, that allyship, bridge building, coalition building doesn't work. But to me, to JCPA, they're proof of need for us to invest more deeply, lean in more deeply to the challenging conversations like this one, to build bridges and coalitions across communities and across lines of difference wherever possible. That's what we're doing at JCPA, at the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. We just launched last month 2 action networks rooted in protecting our democracy and countering hate in all of its forms, because we know that Jewish safety is inextricably linked with the rights and safety of all communities and with our democracy. And we cannot protect anyone or our democracy without confronting anti-Semitism head on. And Jews truly won't be safe unless all communities are safe. And our work to protect and advance the inclusive, pluralistic, multiracial democracy we desperately need can move forward in the coalitions we need to be in. And so it's understanding this deep interconnection. It's leaning in through conversations like this in these deeply painful and challenging moments. And it's fundamentally understanding what it means to show up for one another, not because we agree on everything, but because we can see each other's pain and grief and humanity at such a tenuous, challenging moment.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a, you state this also beautifully, in that it is in the difference and it's in the stark disagreement that our allyship becomes even more important to one another, where you may see people of color being unjustifiably or cynically targeted with political attacks and accusations. And you being able to stand up and say, hey, despite our differences, this is cynical and wrong and not okay. And for me to use my presence in spaces, just as many others, when we are in spaces and we see that line crossing into anti-Semitism, crossing from criticisms, legitimate, stark, even intense criticisms of the Israeli government's conduct, crossing into actual anti-Semitism, it is then our responsibility to stand up swiftly in those spaces and to shut things down when that line is crossed.